Howdy my totally as always Tubular gamers, and we're back with, you guessed it, another ranking video, and today we are talking Baldur's Gate. Yes, we are actually talking about the Baldur's Gate series. Now, for the unfamiliar, Baldur's Gate is a series of RPGs set in the Forgotten Realms Dungeons & Dragons campaign setting. These are very much D&D games. There's actually two sub-series in the Baldur's Gate series, the main trilogy and then the Dark Alliance series. We'll be looking at both of them today. You know, over the years, there's been a number of Baldur's Gate titles, and a lot of people have credited these games with really revitalizing the CRPG genre and Dungeons & Dragons as a whole. It was a lot of people's gateway to playing D&D, was trying Baldur's Gate out on the computer, or maybe the Dark Alliance games on like PS2, and the series honestly had been kind of quiet the last, I'd say, decade and a half or so, outside of some re-releases and a not-so-great game. But in recent times, Baldur's Gate 3 has come out, and it's been just crazy well received, to the point that I'm sure Baldur's Gate has done it again. They've gotten a bunch of people into D&D, they want people to try D&D, and a lot of people are going back and trying the whole series. And so I'm here to talk about all the Baldur's Gate games. We're going to be talking about all of them, worst to best. We're going to be ranking them based on their quality, how they've aged, how much fun they are, the story, the lore, all of that good stuff. There's really 6 games in the Baldur's Gate series. However, the first 2 entries have had a number of re-releases and expansions, and we're just going to be combining the re-releases and expansions into one entry. So we're going to be talking about 6 different games here. This is just my opinion, you know. I'm going to just put this out there. When it comes to Baldur's Gate, some of these games are absolutely massive, and you could spend hours talking about these games. I've seen plenty of videos that spend hours talking about each of the Baldur's Gate titles, and that's not what we're going to do here. We're doing a pretty surface level review of the game, just my opinions, my thoughts. I did not play these games back in the 90s or the 2000s. I played them now in 2023. And so I'm looking at these games with a modern perspective, and I know that might rub some people the wrong way. So all I got to say to that is, this is, again, my opinion, my list. Let me know down below why you agree, disagree, what your list looks like. Just let me know how you're feeling. I always like to read the comments. And of course, correcting me if I get shit wrong. But I'm trying my best here, you know, recently laid off, just been playing a shit ton of Baldur's Gate. So like, share, subscribe. Let me know down below how you're feeling. We got a Patreon going on. Let's just get right into it. So out of these 6 games, what do I think is the weakest of the Baldur's Gate series? And so here we have Dungeons & Dragons Dark Alliance releasing in 2021. Now, while this game doesn't have the Baldur's Gate name in it, it very much is a Dark Alliance game, which is part of the Baldur's Gate series. This game, though, actually has no connection to the older Dark Alliance games, and it kind of feels like they were just using the name. The game doesn't exactly have a lot of story or characters or world building or lore or really any of those things that Baldur's Gate is known for. The game takes place in the tundra region of Icewind Dale, and it has some characters from the novel series, Legend of Drizzt, and you have 4 different playable characters. You can play the entire game in single player or with multiplayer. I'm going to just tell you right now, if you're not playing in co-op, this game is just tremendously bad. So yeah, I definitely recommend the co-op if you were going to try this game, but at this point in time, I think it's pretty clear that this is not only one of the worst D&D games of all time, but one of the worst games on like modern consoles. Now, this game is not like Gollum bad, but this is not a good game. This is a very mediocre to bad third-person hack and slash with some RPG elements, and all I gotta say was, I didn't play much of this game, and I didn't want to play much more of this game. It was just not enjoyable pretty much right from the get-go. Like I said, you can choose 4 different characters. They're all different from each other. They're all different classes, and I would assume they're all decently different. At least their moves are different from each other, but what you're doing is exactly the same. Really, you're just kind of going from point A to B, just destroying everything and collecting loot and just progressing forward. There's not much more to it than that. Now, when it comes to the combat, I mean, it's just straight up bad. There's really nothing good about the combat in this game. Not only does it feel terrible, it's not fun to control, but it's unexciting. It's not engaging, it's not interesting, it's challenging, but for the wrong reasons, because the balancing is completely off the handle. The balancing is all kinds of whack. The systems that are set up with the stamina just are stupid. This game, above all else, is just uninteresting. It's boring, it's a slog, it's a chore. The combat, it just sucks. And if you're in single player, it's even worse because you can't be revived, so you gotta go back to the previous checkpoint. The RPG and loot elements of this game are just so bland also. There's just nothing going for this game. Like, It just feels like a critical failure on almost every aspect, especially the stability. When this game came out, it was mad buggy, it ran like shit, and you know what, nowadays, it's really not any different. It just looks and runs and feels terrible to play. Even when this game is at its absolute best, I can still confidently say I'd rather play like any other D&D game, or you know what, I'd rather just go play D&D. If you like this game, more power to you, but I, in good faith, cannot recommend anybody ever even look at this game, honestly. And here we have Baldurs Gate Dark Alliance, developed by Snowblind Studios and released initially on the PS2 in 2001. It has since been re-released on many other consoles, including the Game Boy Advance. But the most accessible way to play it nowadays is the modern re-release for modern consoles and PC. This game was kind of made in response to the amount of people that wanted Baldur's Gate on a console. I mean, they heard how great it was on the computer. Yeah, I want it on my console. And what they got, you know, it wasn't exactly what they expected, but Dark Alliance has gone on to be an absolute classic, not just for D&D games, but games in general. The game takes place in a number of areas, all in the Faerun continent of the Forgotten Realms. But the game starts with your character going to the city Baldur's Gate and getting jumped by the Thieves Guild, and the story just kind of goes from there. Look, the story of Dark Alliance, I'll be real, it's alright. It's not amazing. I mean, there's characters here, there's decent world building, but the story itself, yeah, it's just alright. But it's clear that the story and the world and characters and all that is not really the focus of this game. The focus really is on the gameplay. At the start of the game, you can choose 3 different classes. You can be a fighter, an archer, or a sorceress. And you don't have to play alone, as this game also does support co-op. So when it comes to the actual gameplay, does this game play like the old CRPGs, like the older Baldur's Gate? No, it does not. It actually plays a bit different. It's actually a real-time hack and slash ARPG presented in a 3D perspective with, you know, the isometric view, and it's best comparable to Diablo. Like, I'm not trying to be as reductive as possible, but it's best compared to Diablo. But back then, you know, there actually were a decent amount of other action RPGs. It wasn't just Diablo like how it feels like it is these days. So the game is a very linear ARPG where you go quest to quest, town to town, area to area, just kind of beating the shit out of monsters, killing just about everything that moves that isn't giving you a quest. Or trying to sell you something, I guess.
It feels like somebody wants to sell me something!
I told you he was on to us.
My point is you'll be getting into a lot of combat in this game. There's really 3 types of combat depending on the class you chose, and the 3 classes, they actually do play rather different from each other. And the combat in this game, it's actually satisfying. It is fun. It actually does feel like there's some strategy here. You're not just mindlessly mashing buttons, especially when you're playing cooperatively, depending on the class setups. Yeah, there actually is some strategy. I quite enjoyed the combat, and it's a good thing because, yeah, that's really a majority of the game is getting into combat. The other big part of this game is the loot, you know, all the RPG elements and the loot. You'll be defeating a bunch of stuff. Hopefully you're getting some good shit in return, and yeah, the loot is actually fun in this game. Yeah, it is similar to Diablo, I guess. I think the loot is decent in this game, and then the actual RPG elements, you know, as you level up, you can increase your character's stats and all that, and I think the progression is really solid here. I think this is like low-key the best aspect of the game. While the combat is good, but I wouldn't say it's anywhere near as random or just all over the place. I feel like the drops are actually decent. You can get good stuff from the store, and you can sell everything, and is satisfying in many areas. I won't lie, if the progression wasn't good with like leveling up your character and making your build better and better or more diverse or adding more strategy, yeah, the combat would probably get old, but the progression's actually good here. It allows the game to stay a little varied and stay interesting throughout. You know, it's not the longest game, taking around maybe like 7 to 10 hours. But I was enjoying myself like the entire time, making my character stronger, getting cooler loot, and then just killing shit with, again, satisfying combat. And if you've got a friend, sibling, family member, enemy, dog, goldfish, whatever's going to play this game with you, all the better. I don't really have many issues with this game. I mean, you know, it's not the longest. The story and the world building isn't, you know, phenomenal. The platforming is just annoying and it sucks. And the presentation can be kind of questionable in some areas, but above all else, I do recommend the game. What's great is you don't even got to bust out like the PS2 or the GameCube or anything like that. You can just play it on your modern consoles, and yeah, while I do wish the modern version added like online co-op or maybe a couple more quality of life modern features, we still have the game. You can still play the game on a modern console, which is good. And the fact that the game hasn't aged like shit is just a testament to how good Dark Alliance actually still is. Now, I'm sure somebody's going to let me know down below I forgot this game, so I'm going to give it a shout out. We're going to shout out the Game Boy Advance version. I've never messed around with this version, but it is a little different from the home console version, so we're giving a little shout out to the GBA version. But, you know, when it comes to the main release, the console and PC version, I have no problem recommending Dark Alliance if you like action RPGs or D&D. And so here we have Dark Alliance 2 releasing initially in 2004, but has also been re-released on modern consoles. So Dark Alliance 2, you know, they weren't trying to reinvent the wheel. They saw a lot of people like the first one, just said, well, how do we add more? When it comes to the game's setting, it is focused mostly around the city of Baldurs Gate itself. While the first game had you go into a bunch of different locations, here most of the game is in Baldurs Gate. The game takes place right after the first one and sees a cry for help in the city of Baldur's Gate, and a bunch of new adventurers, heroes, whatever you want to call them, coming to answer the call. And then the plot goes in a number of directions. I'd say the plot is a little bit more involved in the second one. Would I say it's a bit better? I don't know. I'd say this game is pretty similar to the first one in terms of quality with its story, world building, characters, etc. There are some nods and throwbacks and references to the first game, but what is nice is you do not have to play the first game or remember what happened in the story to enjoy this game's story. Like the first game, really the focus was on the gameplay, and when it comes to the gameplay, it's incredibly similar to the first Dark Alliance. The game is still a very linear action RPG, seeing you go through towns, completing quests, killing some ugly monsters, getting tons upon tons of loot, selling tons upon tons of loot, getting some money, going from quest to quest, and of course all the RPG elements here. But this game does expand on the gameplay in a few areas. First off, there's more classes than the first game. This game has 5 classes, and none of the characters are returning here, so it's all new characters / classes you get to play with, meaning, you know, more depth, more customization, and of course as you level up you get to put points into attributes, really allowing you to customize each class more so than even the first game. In fact, when it comes to replayability and depth and just how you have your builds, I think this game is a bit better than the first one. If you like the first Dark Alliance's gameplay, you're gonna like the second game's also. It's as simple as that. I think the progression is just as solid as the first game's also. You can watch yourself become way more powerful and just hella raw. And the combat really is just as good as the first game. It's just as satisfying. There is a little bit of strategy here, and the loot drops are decent still. Look, Black Isle just understood the assignment, make the first game but somehow even a little better, and they absolutely did. The co-op gameplay is enhanced, and a new feature to Dark Alliance 2 is that you can actually create custom weapons and armor. I think this is a neat addition, and it allows for even more customization, even more depth, even more ways to play the game. Like this game, it's got a good amount of customization, and I think that it allows it to stand on its own from the first game. Obviously, the presentation is a little better than the first games, and now like the first games, it's readily available on modern platforms. You don't gotta break out one of the old consoles to play it. And so what I can really say about this game, if you like the first one, if you like action RPGs, I got no problem recommending this game because it's actually not only incredibly fun, but it's actually a pretty good game. Now, I wouldn't say this game is a massive improvement on the first Dark Alliance, or it's just so much better you don't even need to play the first Dark Alliance. No, I would say this game is a little better than the first Dark Alliance, and I could see why somebody would maybe prefer the original, but I'd much rather have the customization and depth of the second game with the awesome combat. Either way, you really can't go wrong with either Dark Alliance game. I think they're both a great time, and I have no problem recommending them, and it's super easy to recommend them since you don't need to break something out with composite cables. And so here we have Baldur's Taint, developed by BioWare and released for the computer in '98. It was eventually re-released as Baldur's Taint Enhanced Edition in 2012 for computers and eventually consoles as well. Now, when this game was released, it was considered just a landmark RPG. Like, it wasn't just a landmark game for RPGs or D&D games, but just video games in general. Like, this original game continues to be referenced as a point of inspiration in even modern role-playing games. But that was then. This is now.
That was then. And this is now.
The real question is, does this game actually hold up in current day? Well, yes and no. I think the game does in plenty of aspects, but I also think it doesn't hold up very well in numerous other aspects. The game takes place on the western shoreline of Faerun, but it sees you going across a ton of different environments. Like, you really go all over the place. There's tons of different forests, mountains, plains, cities, ruins. Like, the environments are really varied here. And the game sees your character that you get to customize being an orphaned ward of this mage named Gorion. And after seeing said mage get killed off, you embark on a journey, and I gotta say, while a lot of things haven't aged all that well in this game, something that has is the world building, the story, the characters, the setting, the writing, and the aesthetic. Man, the aesthetic and the atmosphere of this game still hits so good. Like, it doesn't really matter what year it is, this game just has a great vibe, a great atmosphere to it. Like, of course, the graphics are a little dated, the voice acting could be a little better, but it just doesn't really matter. Like, it still is able to hit in a certain way. And there's just so much world building and character and life and lore to this entire world that it's just awesome. It really is just awesome here. Alright, enough about that though. What is the gameplay? What does this game actually play like? So, players will conduct the game from a top-down isometric third-person perspective where you will create your character who then travels across pre-rendered locations, taking on quests, recruiting companions to aid them, and of course combating enemies while working towards completing the game's main story. And when it comes to controlling the game, really it's the same as any other CRPG. You know, you can control their inventory or their actions or their formation or anything like that. See, Baldur's Gate, it really didn't establish the CRPG formula, but it really re-established it and brought it back into the forefront. And I think that anybody who's played really any CRPG is going to be able to pick this game up and at least be able to understand most of the game's mechanics. They could at least understand the interface and the controls and just kind of how the game works in various aspects. Sure, the interface is a little clunky, but you get used to it. Something that I don't think a lot of people are going to understand is all of the gameplay mechanics that were coded to conform to D&D 2nd edition rules. So D&D, you know, there's a couple different editions. This game uses 2nd edition, and I could be here for 20 minutes complaining why 2nd edition is, I'll just say, not my preferred version of D&D. But we aren't going to do that because the Loch Ness Monster owes me $3.50 and I gotta go get it from him so I can have dinner at the vending machine. I will just say that 2nd edition has some flaws. Something interesting is the game does move in real time, but you can actually pause the game at any point to control what your characters are going to do next, which is certainly helpful. It allows you to create strategies before battles, and hopefully those strategies actually work because the dice are in your favor. See, when it comes to the combat in the original Baldur's Gate, I'll just be real, it is rough. Like, it is actually quite rough. It was a bit jarring when I first played. I was like, wow, this is way rougher than I thought. Like, I expected some jank, maybe some clunkiness, or taking a bit of time to get used to, like, say, the old Fallouts, but no. This is rough. You can play on easy on the enhanced edition, which makes things a bit better, and I recommend everybody play on easy, honestly. I really recommend that everybody plays on easy. The combat in this game is very much reliant on the dice. The dice really control the combat. Like, all of the battles feel actually pretty authentic to D&D. You're just rolling the dice, it takes a long ass time, you miss a lot, and eventually, hopefully, the battle ends and you win. Obviously, you get to really customize your class and your build, and so these encounters, you know, there's a ton of strategy, there's a ton of different ways to usually go about everything, but it all relies on the dice. Of course, you've got your companions to help you. You can actually have up to like 5 or 6 companions, and you can even go online and have people join you, which is cool. But I mean, all of this is assuming that, you know, you actually are able to hit something, which sometimes can take quite a while. In fact, if I had to say there was an aspect of Baldur's Gate that is aged the worst, it is the combat. The combat is just really difficult to go back to in the modern day. You know, I'm sure plenty of people played it back then when they had just a lot more patience or free time or whatever it was, and they were able to put up with this combat and maybe even enjoyed it. And I can enjoy the complexity of it. There really is a lot of depth with this combat, but I just could never really get past the combat in this game. Like, it was just a slog, it was a bit boring, it got frustrating numerous times, even on easy. And I regularly had to consult a guide just to figure out what the hell I was even doing in a few aspects, only to find out it was some 2nd edition bullshit, like with the whole armor situation. But you know what? I'm not going to go there with the 2nd edition. I'm not going to go there. I'll just say the combat, it is the roughest part, it is the most aged part, and I think it turns off a lot of people from playing this game past the first couple hours. And I really couldn't blame someone who, say, tried this game in the modern day and went, man, I love the story and the world and all that, but the combat, man, the combat is just ass, and I can't get into this game and I'm dropping it. And you know, I can't blame them. I really can't. The combat was not enjoyable. At least for the most part, it wasn't enjoyable. There were moments where, yeah, it actually was cool and I did some cool shit and the dice was in my favor, but most of the time, it was just a frustrating bore. Outside of the combat though, there's actually a lot going on here. Not only can you explore all these areas and there's tons of quests and conversations to have with people, but this game just has a bunch of different systems in it that were not only forward thinking and honestly ahead of their time, but also a bit experimental. I mean, just from the fact that you can basically completely customize your character and like the race and the class and your build, that's already something most modern games don't even have, or how the game actually has a reputation system for the most part. Sure, it is a bit experimental and can be a little hit and miss, but it has an actual reputation system to it. A lot of these quests, you know, they aren't the most complex, but sometimes there's actually multiple ways of going about them, and the environments you explore are actually really interesting also. I like that it's all pre-rendered. It reminds me of, you know, the classics like Grim Fandango and Final Fantasy VII. I think this game looks great pre-rendered background-wise. And again, I could really go off about the world building and the lore and all of that. That's really what propped this game up for me. That's what kept me going. That's what kept me interesting, was I really wanted to see what would happen next, where I would end up next, and what kind of encounters I would get into. It was not the combat, or really a couple aspects of the gameplay. It was everything else. And you know, games aren't just the gameplay. It's about how everything comes together, and in the end, would I recommend the original game? Do I recommend the original Baldur's Gate? Well, it depends. It absolutely depends on a couple things. First off, you're absolutely going to want to play the Enhanced Edition, and probably playing on easy. That's, in my opinion, the best way to play the game. It is available on modern consoles as well. If you like CRPGs, you know, maybe you tried Baldur's Gate 3 and you want to try the old ones, then yeah, I think it's worth trying. If you like D&D, I think this is worth trying. But the average person in today's day and age, don't think is going to enjoy this game very much. I think they're going to get frustrated by a lot of the mechanics and not really have the patience for the world building and the story and all of that. And you know, it is what it is. The game is clearly not for everybody, but what I think we have here is still a really good game with a really awesome expansion. I'm going to say, like, I'm going to give a shout out to that expansion. It really is great too, but it certainly is not a game for everybody, and it really takes a different kind of just patient gamer to really get into this game. But I think the game is more than rewarding enough, and in the end I would still say it is a good game and I recommend it, but there's definitely some caveats here. And here we have Baldur's Gate 2, developed by BioWare and released initially in 2000. Like the first game, it has gotten an enhanced edition that you can play on the computer or on modern consoles. Now with Baldur's Gate 2, BioWare really set out to just improve the original game in every way possible, and I think that the second game is not only a lot more approachable than the first game, but is actually a really good game still. So to begin with, the game takes place mostly in just this giant city rather than this entire like continent like the first one. Instead, it really is this focused, dense city. And focused is a good word I would use to describe the entire story, the plot, the characters, etc. It just feels a lot more focused. You know, the first game, it had a plot and characters, and I thought all of that was decent, but this game just right off the bat is a lot more focused with its story. And I think one of the reasons it's a lot more focused is because of the antagonist, Irenicus. He is one of the best antagonists of like any video game. This dude is just awful, and he really brings the story and the character. He brings everything together. And he's just an expert villain. He really is. And he's expertly written. In fact, the game is actually really well written for the most part. Sure, there are parts that I won't lie haven't aged amazingly, but for the most part, the writing is actually superb. I thought the first game had decent to good writing, but this game, yeah, this is where BioWare really stepped it up to become the powerhouse that they eventually did become. And I think not only is the writing, but the world building, the lore, the characters, the story, the romance, the relationships, literally like everything to do with that is just way better than the first game. It had me intrigued right from the get-go, and I really wanted to see what happened. And this is a big, long, epic journey, and it kept me intrigued and interested the entire time. Like, there is a reason so many people love Baldur's Gate 2, and it's because of this. The world building, the story, the characters, the relationships you make. Like, it is just relatively unmatched. Now, let's talk about the gameplay. The gameplay, it isn't the furthest thing from the original Baldur's Gate. You know, it is still a CRPG, and it has a similar enough interface. It's easier to navigate and less clunky for sure. But if you played the first game at all, you're going to feel right at home here. And the start of the game is the same as the first one. You get to basically completely customize your character and your class. This game adds 3 new classes to the game. So, you know, if there wasn't enough replayability or reason to try the game with a different class, now you got 3 more to try. And of course, you can really customize your character and really build out your build and make the character you want. You know, at the beginning, it's going to be a lot more limiting, you're going to miss a lot, and the game's going to be relatively difficult, but as you continue on, you'll really get to customize everything. The game lets you level up way more times than the original, so you can go and create a bunch of different characters that will be nothing at all like each other thanks to, again, just the customization here, which is very cool. But the actual core gameplay, you know, when you aren't creating your character, sees you and your party going around these areas, exploring, getting into combat, completing quests, having interactions with plenty of NPCs, and really just getting into shenanigans. This game just has a ton of different things going on, while the main quest will take you anywhere from, you know, like 60 to 70 hours. With the side missions, I mean, this game is just ridiculously huge, taking well over 100, 150 hours if you want to do a lot of the side content in this game. There is just a ton to explore. This game is just absolutely brimming with content. And of course, there's a bunch of different ways to usually go about these quests or encounters depending on your build or how you have your character made out. Like, you really do create your own adventure here, and that's what's really cool about it, is they actually really captured that D&D feeling and put it into a game. The first game had it, of course. This game, it just feels so much more grand, and there's so much more stakes, and I don't know, I just felt a lot more personally involved with this one. It was a lot more engaged. Now, when it comes to the combat, I won't lie, it's pretty similar to the first game, and if you didn't like the first game's combat, you're not going to be a big fan here. Maybe I was just a little bit more conditioned to it, but I didn't find it as grating as the first game. I thought the progression was a lot better than the first game. Look, when you start the game, it's difficult. You're shit. You're missing everything. Battles take forever, but you find yourself getting better quite quickly, actually, a lot faster than the first games, and I think that the progression is a lot stronger and it's a lot more new user friendly. Obviously, you're going to need to be patient here. You're going to need to still plan out your moves, and you got to take it a little slow, even if you're playing on easy, which I still absolutely recommend you play on easy. Like, just do yourself a favor and play on easy, because the dice still control a lot. But I think the combat is fine for the most part. I got more used to it than the first games, and again, I think the way the game progresses is a lot better, and it gets the combat a lot more interesting and tolerable a lot faster than the first games. And I was also just so intrigued by the world, the characters, the story. All of that was just really engrossing me into this game. On top of the awesome aesthetic, the great atmosphere, the superb sound design, its well-defined RPG mechanics. Like, I really do think that the second Baldur's Gate, it's a great game, and I have no problem recommending it to more people than the first game, that's for sure. I think that if you've been curious about CRPGs or maybe D&D games, I think this is worth trying. Again, it's not for everybody, but I think most people, if you give this game some time, you can actually get behind it. It's really the game that I think made BioWare as great as they are, and then they'd go on to make, you know, all their awesome other games, but I think this is really where the BioWare magic started to come out. And like the first game, this game also has an expansion. The expansion is awesome also. I mean, I haven't played too much of it, but seems to be pretty good. Maybe one day I'll get around to finishing that one, but also definitely recommend the Enhanced Edition. That's the only version worth playing, in my opinion. Baldur's Gate 2, it really is a classic for a reason, and it's one of the greatest RPGs probably ever made. But then we have Baldur's Gate 3. Oh man, Baldur's Gate 3. What do I even need to say about this game other than that it's so fucking good? It's what made me make this list, made this video. Like, Baldur's Gate 3, holy shit, this game goes so hard. I've been playing it for the last like week or two non-stop with my partner, and we just fucking love this game. Like, this is, in my opinion, not only the best Baldur's Gate game, but the best D&D game like ever made, and is easily, just straight up, one of the best video games ever made. Like, it is crazy how many fantastic games have come out in 2023, and Baldur's Gate 3 is absolutely near the very top for me, if not just the top game. Like, it is mind-blowing how good this game is. Larian Studios, the developers, were not fucking around here. They really brought their A game. They brought everything that the original two Baldur's Gate games have and into the modern day, and then also improved it in a ton of aspects. The plot of the game is just super interesting and engrossing, like literally right off the bat. It starts with your character getting abducted by a mind flayer who puts one of its worms in your head. However, something goes wrong and the worm doesn't transform you yourself into a mind flayer, and you gotta figure out just what the hell is going on. And it is just this giant epic adventure where you get joined by a bunch of other companions who have a similar thing going on. You're all in this shit situation, and so yeah, it's up to you to figure out what the hell is going on. The story of this game, the story is so fucking good in this game. Like, it starts out hella interesting, the world is really interesting, the lore is great, the world building, the characters, the writing, the dialogue, literally everything that has to do with story or just the world of Baldur's Gate 3. It's just fantastic. It's so well written. It's so interesting. They managed to make the most menial of characters interesting. Everyone has good dialogue. Everybody has something to say. Your companions are fantastic. They have really good writing. They're actually really fleshed out, especially by the end of it. And they're all really likable. They all have issues. They all have struggles. And it's just really well made. Like, I perked up, when the game started. I was like, oh, this is interesting. They're starting out with the Mind Flayer, but like the game just kept going. I kept waiting for it low-key to just disappoint me or let me down, or me to be like, oh yeah, it kind of fizzles out at the end. No, this game's story is actually just hella good through and through. The characters are great, the story's great, the world is great. It is just excellent. Like, I could very easily recommend the game based off the story and the characters and the writing alone. Like, forget the game. Everything else I just mentioned, it's hella good. It's better than just about any other game you'll play this year. This is the most invested I've ever been in a D&D story or world or anything like that. It is just fantastic. I could probably gush for 20 more minutes about the characters and the choices you can make and the interactions. Like, it's just so fucking good, man. But let's talk about the gameplay. This is a video game after all, and it isn't all that different from the old Baldur's Tank game. It still is absolutely a CRPG at heart, and it does actually still follow Dungeons & Dragons rules. Obviously, it doesn't use 2nd edition, because why the fuck would you ever want to use 2nd edition when you can use any other version these days? And I'd say the biggest gameplay change from the first 2 games to this one is that it is turn-based. The original game, there was so much fucking pausing, it felt like a turn-based game, but this game, it is actually a turn-based RPG, and that's fine with me. That's absolutely fine with me. I prefer that, low-key. In fact, not even low-key, high-key, I much prefer this to what the first 2 games had. I'd much rather take my time and have it be turn-based. And I guess while we're talking about turn-based and all that, let's talk about the combat. The combat is not only a major improvement over the first 2 games and is a lot more accessible than the first 2 games, but it's just some of the most enjoyable combat I've had in any RPG. It still is very much D&D combat, so you can't come in here expecting like Persona 5 or Dragon Quest or anything like that. It's a lot slower, it's a lot more methodical, there's a lot going on here, and the dice still plays a big part of the combat. Obviously nowhere near as much as the first 2 games, but luck really plays a heavy factor in the battles in this game, at least more than any other modern RPGs I can think of. But what makes this combat go from good to just fantastic, in my opinion, is the amount of ways you can tackle every single encounter. So your character, you get to completely customize your build, your race, your class, your background, all of that. But when it comes to the battles, all of that leads to just so many ways you can do these encounters. There's obviously the very upfront, blunt manner where you just beat the shit out of them with something or use magic, but the world is so interactive here, and the game always responds to what you're doing. Like, you're fighting on top of a large bridge and one of the enemies is on the bridge. Destroy the bridge. The enemy will fall and die, and you'll win the battle instantly, and the game encourages you to do that. It encourages you to look around your surroundings like real D&D. Take advantage of the situation. Some people go, oh, you're cheating, you're breaking the game. The game encourages you to do that. It wants you to take advantage of it and just go nuts with it. And I've had so many encounters where I did some shit that I didn't even think was possible. My partner did something crazy and I'm like, what the fuck? I didn't even think of doing that, and it worked. Not only did it work, we just won like instantly because of it. The game rewards you for going outside of the box and coming up with solutions, and this carries not only to the combat but the entire game. There are so many ways to go about literally everything in this game. You can do everything in this game so many different ways, and I'm not just talking about, some quests or like there's a couple key quests where you can go different ways. I am talking literally fucking everything. Absolutely everything can be done in a different way, depending on your skills, depending on your build, depending on your class, your race, everything. Like, there are so many ways to go about actually everything. Like, even the most mundane stuff can be done in different ways and you'll get different results. Like, I truly have just been blown away with how many different ways you can approach basically every single interaction in the game. And then the game also is highly interactable to you, the player. You can cause shit to happen and the game will react, not just in battle, but like in the world itself. For instance, I found a scroll that lets you talk to dead people. I happened to find a dead mind flayer in a lair. I activate the scroll, I use it on the mind flayer. All of a sudden I'm getting all this story lore and the characters, like my companions are talking to me about it, and there's actually a big reward. This was a totally random fucking mind flayer I found on the ground. And the game like mad rewarded me with story and lore and character interactions. Like, I could have very easily missed this. In fact, I'm sure most people missed this or didn't think of it. And they actually put a bunch of effort into it. They put a ton of effort into literally everything. I can't help but just commend it immediately. The game has basically low-key, almost like it feels like infinite replay value. Like, the amount of outcomes you have is just insane. Like, you could play through this game 10 times and it wouldn't be the same. Like, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And then the game's progression, like with its RPG mechanics, are just superb. Like, you feel yourself get hella raw, hella powerful, and you just become a beast. Like, I don't even know what else to say about Baldur's Gate 3. The progression and the RPG mechanics are superb. The interactions and replay value are just off the charts. The combat is just exceptional. Like, this game is just amazing. Like, the presentation is fantastic. It runs really well on the PC. Bugs, there have been some bugs, but there hasn't been anything game breaking, at least not yet for me, but I'm sure there are some game breaking bugs still in there. The whole game can be played locally in co-op or online up to 4 players. Like, if you like RPGs, if you have even the smallest interest in RPGs, you know what, forget it. If you like video games, I think this game is worth trying. I absolutely think this game is worth trying. I'm sure, I can just tell you right now, it's not for everybody. I'm sure there are plenty of people that are going to get frustrated with the combat, or that it is a little slower pace compared to something like Persona 5 or some other big RPG, but I think just about anybody can enjoy something from this game. Like, I'm really just sitting here blown away with how good this game is. Like, this game, it realized its scope. It goes above and beyond. There's no bullshit. There's no DLC or live service or microtransaction or AAA bullshit. Like, this game really exposes a bunch of AAA modern games, particularly RPGs, for just how lacking they are in so many areas. Like, this game has infinite more replayability than like Diablo 4. It just feels like this game has unlimited replayability and potential. Like, I have not been this engrossed in an RPG in some time, and honestly, all day I've just been shaking. I'm supposed to be applying to jobs after I got laid off from Insomniac, looking for jobs, new work, YouTube video. Fuck it, no, I just want to play Baldur's Gate. I just want to play more Baldur's Gate 3, and you know what, that's the end of this video. I've talked about the series enough. Go play Baldur's Gate 3, the game's mad good. All of Baldur's Gate really is hella good. But this game just goes so hard. Just go try it. The end. If you made it to this part of the video, comment cement, as in what's in the ground. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Christmas, New Year's, whatever the closest holiday is. See y'all later. Bye-bye now. Baldur's Gate time.